So now let's look at the cardiac cycle. So again, the cardiac cycle is basically what happens or what occurs during a heartbeat. So we got to start somewhere. So we're starting basically here. So if we start here, we see that in this picture we have ventricular filling. And if you can see these these little arrows too, we also have atrial filling going on as well. But of course, we know that once blood goes into the atria, it will open the AV valve there and go start passively filling the ventricles. And this is on both sides. So in this state right here, the atria, you've got atrial diastole, because the atria are relaxed, and ventricular diastole, because the ventricles are relaxed. Both are filling. So during late ventricular diastole, we come this way and we get our P wave. So atrial depolarization. Atrial depolarization will happen here, and that will cause the atria to contract. So once we get to here, we have atrial systole. And ventricles are still relaxed. The ventricles are still in diastole. So that's atrial contraction. So atria are contracting, and while they're contracting, we're now going into the Qrs complex. So ventricular depolarization. So the ventricles depolarize and the ventricles contract. So ventricular systole. And when that happens, when the ventricles start to contract, they push the AV valves shut. So they push the AV valves shut, and for just a second, there is a time where all valves are closed. So all the valves are closed here, the AV valves and the semilunar valves, because the semilunar valves have not opened yet because the contraction is just starting. So in this moment where all the valves are closed into and out of that ventricle, we're going to contain, we can kind of measure the amount of blood that's in there. So that moment is called the Isovolumetric Contraction. And here is where the maximum amount of blood is in there. So we call that end diastolic volume, or EDV. And that's going to be a high number. All the blood that's in there, that's all of it, right? So that's the most that's going to be in there. So that's the end diastolic volume, and that comes when we have the isovolumetric contraction, which is where that contraction at the very beginning So like at the apex of the heart, as it starts to contract and send that action potential to all the contractile muscles up the walls of the, through the Purkinje fibers up the walls of the ventricles, that is enough to close the AV valves, but not enough to open the semilunar valves, and we're in a completely closed compartment there. All right, so then we're having systole and we have ventricular ejection, which is where, of course, the blood then heads into the aorta or the pulmonary trunk. So this is the full ventricular contraction. All right, so during this time, now we're entering the T wave, which is ventricular repolarization. So now we have diastole again. So now we're back to ventricular diastole. And for just one moment, okay, atria are now in diastole as well. So there's atrial, and they've just started filling with blood. So ventricle contracted, they're now relaxed. So now the semilunar lunar valves are closed, stopping any blood from coming back into the ventricle. And the AV valves haven't opened yet. AV valves aren't open yet. So again, we have a closed area in the ventricles. Everything is closed. So that is called isovolumetric relaxation. And that is where the least amount of blood is going to be in the ventricle. So we call that end systolic volume, or ESV. So we have, now we've gone through the whole cycle. The ventricles are contract, the atria are contract, and during this time here, the AV valves then start to open, and we start to get passive filling into the ventricle. So we're back to where we started, and then you've got the atrial depolarization occur again, and the whole thing starts again. So from where we started back to where we were, that is one heartbeat.